This week, we're joined by Indiana's Lieutenant Governor, Suzanne Crouch, to discuss matters affecting issues at the state level. WNIN Lawmakers is up next. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, WNIN FM's news manager. And joining us now is Indiana's Lieutenant Governor and Southwestern Indiana native, Suzanne Crouch. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you, John. As you well know, I was the auction manager at WNIN years ago.
Yes,
it's always
indeed.
good to be back with you all, kind of sharing ideas and thoughts and viewpoints on what's going on in the state and locally.
We appreciate that. Thank you for joining us. Well, let's start with one of the issues that you've been raising a red flag about lately, the budget deficit at the Family Social Services Administration and their proposed solution to that shortfall. Could you explain to our viewers what's been going on there and what is the solution?
Sure, absolutely, John. And you know, working with Hoosiers with Disabilities has been kind of a hallmark of my public service. Actually started back when I was a county commissioner and appointed to serve on the ARC of Evansville board. And I was so touched, not just by the population, but by the caring concern that their family members and caregivers had for them. And I stayed involved with that issue as a state representative, and now as Lieutenant Governor have weighed in on the $1 billion error that FSSA, or Family Social Services Administration, has made. They came out with that error back in December of 2023. And so as the chair of the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Task Force, which by the way, is dedicated to helping those who have autism, Down syndrome, or cerebral palsy. And so when FSSA ended up with their $1 billion shortfall, what they proposed was to take the parents of those children who are severely disabled and have complex medical needs. They proposed moving those families to a different program, one that would not compensate them as they were being compensated for caring for their loved ones. So what I'm talking about children who have very complex medical needs. These are children with tracheotomies, or children with feed tubes, or children on ventilators. We're not talking about children that you could put in front of a TV set and feed them a couple of times a day. These are children that require 24/7 care. And so then for FSSA to suggest and propose that we take those families and then move them to a program where they won't be able to take care of their children because of the compensation that is being provided, to me, just deserved attention. And so I called a meeting of the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Task Force in January 29th of 2024 to have FSSA appear before us and answer questions. And they really could not do a good job of answering the questions. And so as chair of that task force, I asked FSSA to pause their implementation of this program, which is to take effect July 1, until they could provide answers and guidance to those families that they were proposing moving to a new program.
Right. Well, I guess the big question is, do we know how this $1 billion shortfall came about? You say you're looking for answers. Are there any answers or ideas at this point as to how this happened?
Well, not to date, and it's one of the reasons why I also, as chair of that task force, I asked for an independent outside audit of FSSA so we could determine how this happened. How can an agency make a $1 billion mistake? If that was the private sector, heads would be rolling. And yet they make this mistake and say they're going to go ahead and make up for that $1 billion loss by putting it on the backs of these families and these children that deserve our support. And John, at the end of the day, we are going to be judged by how we care for the most vulnerable among us. We don't want to be judged in a way that does not support those Hoosiers that are most vulnerable. And so have been speaking out on this issue, and the Indiana House of Representatives has put forth some amendments in a bill to be able to address the issue of how did this happen, to address the issue of getting a waiver from CMS, the federal agency that oversees these programs, to allow for these families to be taken care of. What we know right now is the bill that those amendments have been proposed in currently has not been passed by both houses. And so it's still up in the air. I'm pushing very hard to make sure that we have that accountability, that transparency, and are able to provide the care for those parents and those families who so desperately need it. Because if parents can't be adequately compensated for caring for their severely disabled, medically complex children, who's going to care for them? I mean, we have a shortage of pediatric nurses. We have a shortage of healthcare workers. We have to have care being able to be provided for these children to prevent them from being institutionalized. So we need to wrap our arms around these families and figure out what we need to do to make changes to help them.
All right, well, we will certainly be watching and see how that all plays out in the General Assembly and from the governor's office. Moving on to something else, a few weeks ago, it was announced that 13 rural Indiana communities will receive more than $8 million in federal grant funding to create and expand community facilities and also remove blight and improve water infrastructure. Can you tell us which communities in our area will be receiving those funds and what kind of projects we're talking about here?
You know, I'll have to get that for you, John.
Okay.
Because I expect what you're wanting to know is Posey, Vandenberg, Warwick, Gibson, Perry, Spencer, kind of that southwest area, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll have to get that for you.
Yeah, I know we had the story on the air about, on WNIN FM about that, but just I think we were still, wanting a few specifics. So I appreciate you looking into that, and we'll certainly get back to that. Well, something else we've been talking about is rural broadband. That's been an issue for many years, and expanding it has been a priority since the COVID pandemic. Can you tell us where that effort stands for the state and our region in particular?
Absolutely. Well, my alma mater, Purdue University, back in 2018 did a study. And they said at that time we had 100,000 Hoosiers that were in internet darkness, and if we could connect all of them over the next years, that would result in $12 billion economic impact to our state. So in 2019, we started investing in expanding broadband throughout Indiana because we know that Indiana is our next great economic development frontier. But unless people are connected and have equal opportunity to not only have educational opportunities, but healthcare opportunities through telehealth, being able to have economic opportunities for small businesses and businesses in rural Indiana, and be able to have the opportunity in agriculture as farmers and agribusinesses to be able to connect to the internet, because so much of what we do agriculturally is internet driven. So we knew that was absolutely critical. And to date, we have, through the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, which is an office that I oversee, we have to date invested over $270 million of state money, which will, once it is fully deployed, connect 70,000 new families and businesses throughout Indiana, helping to unlock that economic opportunity that is out there. We know we still have much to do, and that is why this year, Indiana will be the beneficiary of BEAD grant money, federal grant money, in the amount of $868 million, which will go a long way towards connecting every Hoosier to the last mile. And the thing is, if we want people to enjoy quality of life, they have to be connected. And rural Indiana deserves the opportunity to have the same amenities and the same kind of connection that our more urban counterparts have. So
Do we
we're
have a
really excited
timeline
about.
on how soon, say, rural broadband will be everywhere in Indiana?
Well, I think that depends on how quickly and how fast we're able to deploy that $868 million, because it takes a while to actually award the money and then be able to have the providers connect the Hoosiers.
Right.
I hope that in my end of my term as governor, every Hoosier will be connected to the last mile.
All right. Well, let's move on to another issue, particularly affecting rural Indiana. About 42% of Indiana's rural hospitals no longer provide obstetric care, which means women in labor sometimes have to travel further to deliver a baby. Both reimbursement funds and recent anti-abortion legislation are suspected factors in that trend. What do you think can be done about the lack of obstetric care in rural areas of Indiana?
Well, first of all, it's extremely important that women, regardless of where you live in Indiana, have access to OBGYN services. And currently, those women in rural areas that do not have those services available to them have about a 30-minute drive to those services. And we know a lot can happen in 30 minutes. But I also will tell you that the distance from my home in Vanderburgh County to the nearest hospital is about 20 minutes. So even in those areas where you have those services, we need to be sure that we can get women connected to those services. So the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues in hospitals not providing the OBGYN services is because of the lack of Medicaid reimbursement, them not being able to be reimbursed at a level that allows them to support those services. And so many of our rural hospitals have put aside and discontinued the use of those services. And we know that that trend will continue unless we address that issue.
And I guess the question would be, how do we address that, and how do we get more of those OB deserts taken care of?
Absolutely. There's a couple of ways. One, we look at the Medicaid reimbursement rate. Two, we look at supporting communities that actually take it upon themselves, their governments, to be able to put in place programs that bring those services and bring that care to those women. So for instance, one that I'm familiar with is Crawfordsville, Indiana, has a program through their city and through their fire department to actually provide services to those women who are getting ready to give birth and have given birth, to make sure that they're getting the support and the health care that they need. But in addition, we have to look at those programs, which we have throughout rural Indiana, that provides perinatal care through navigators, being able to work with those women who are expecting, or those new mothers, to be sure that we are connecting them to the right services and helping them through that period of motherhood. So it's kind of a twofold program, a twofold problem that we have to address. One, the reimbursement rate, but two, how do we encourage and support services that will get that care to those women that are in those OBGYN deserts?
You mentioned firefighters or fire departments. I mean, are we looking at possible birthing centers at firehouses, that kind of thing?
Now that I haven't heard discussed, but I will tell you what we do have at fire departments throughout Indiana is we have what we call safe haven baby boxes.
Right.
So we know that there are mothers who have children that know or make the decision that they themselves cannot care for these babies, and they can then take them to a safe haven baby box, which typically are located at fire departments, and they can surrender their child with no questions asked, and then that child then is immediately wrapped with love and given the services and finding a forever home for them, a loving home with parents. And so possibly, I haven't heard that, but we do know our brave men and women who are in our fire services, professional firefighters and volunteer firefighters, often are faced with situations where they have to assist in the birth of a child.
Right, right. All right, well, let's move on to another issue here. House Bill 1001. It would have allowed 21st century funds to be expanded to include more training programs and other non-traditional programs. Lawmakers have decided to table that now until next year and create a new fund specifically for that purpose instead of expanding the 21st century program. What are your thoughts on assisting young people with training programs? What would you like to see?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we have to prepare every child for that next step in life upon graduation, whether it's enlistment, employment, enrollment, apprenticeship. And so making sure that our children, when they're in high school, are prepared for that next step means preparing them for either higher education, preparing them for a community college, or preparing them for an apprenticeship or certification that gets them into the workforce. And so absolutely have been supportive. And as governor, I would be sure that we continue to support those opportunities for those children so that they can make the decision for the path that is best suited for them. And I suspect that the reason there was no action taken on that item this year is that it does involve money. And this is a short session where the money issues will be addressed next year in the long session. And so, yes, absolutely support it. I look for the General Assembly to take action on that. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait till next year.
All right, we will see how that develops next year. One of the hot button issues in our area this week also includes money. That is a proposed electric rate increase by CenterPoint Energy. We've had large groups of folks opposed, expressing their opposition to that. What are your thoughts on that proposed increase, especially so soon after other increases that we've seen from CenterPoint? Basically, what is the government's role in these issues, if there's anything that can be done by the government?
Well, first of all, yes, the government plays a role through the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, which has the final say in approving rate increases. But we also have the Indiana Office of Utility Consumer, right, who actually will be kind of a voice for the utility customers. So we know that they are asking for comments from now through May 5th. And I would encourage everyone, if you haven't appeared in person at the public hearings, to please go to that website and be sure and have a comment. What I find, I guess, somewhat disturbing, John, is I travel Indiana, and Hoosiers are being crushed today by the high cost of living, by inflation, and by economics. Today, it costs $11,000 more than it did 3 years ago just to meet basic household needs. So the timing could not be worse, and that's why I would urge CenterPoint and our utility companies to pause and to actually not implement a rate increase at this particular point in time when Hoosiers are struggling so desperately.
Is a position like Lieutenant Governor or Governor able to tell the IURC, hey, this is what we'd like you to do or not to do?
Yeah, IURC is an independent board, and so they are not to be lobbied in any shape, form, or fashion by the governor or by any special interests or by the public. And so that is to protect them to be able to make decisions that are right for Indiana and right for our Hoosiers. And so that is really kind of the restrictions that are put on the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. I would certainly respect those restrictions.
Right. All right, well, let's move on to another issue, or another bill, I should say, at the General Assembly. It's a bill that would limit a governor's ability to extend state disaster declarations. It's received some support in the General Assembly this year. What are your thoughts on limiting the governor in that way?
You know, I am a former state representative.
Right.
And today, even though I'm lieutenant governor and in the executive branch, I also am president of the Senate. I truly believe for our government to act best for the citizens that we serve, we have to have a balance of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. And what happened during COVID is that balance of power got disrupted. And so, heaven forbid we ever find ourselves in that kind of a situation again. And I will tell you this as governor, if we ever find ourselves in that situation again, I will not have mask mandates or lockdowns because of what it has done to our public. Today, we have a 20% increase in anxiety and depression among our general population, but we have a 60% increase among young people, John. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people, so we can't go down that road again. So I am supportive and have been speaking out and been very supportive on the General Assembly looking at putting in place check guards to be able to ensure that that balance of power stays intact moving into the future. We can't go back and change what has happened, but we can certainly learn from what we've experienced and make sure we're putting in place safeguards to protect so that that balance of power doesn't get out of whack and those emergency declarations don't go on indefinitely.
Now, of course, we know you are among those running for the governor's office. You mentioned the COVID pandemic and mask mandates, but is it not true that mask mandates also saved lives during the pandemic?
Well, we know that the federal government certainly has come out with so many different opinions on what is and is not, and what was and was not safe. We were told to wear masks. We were told not to wear masks. We were told to wear masks. You know, they have just come out saying that the social distancing really doesn't protect people. And so at the end of the day, John, we have to trust Hoosiers to make the right decisions regarding their health. And so the vaccine really was not a vaccine. A vaccine protects you for life. This was like a flu shot. You get a shot, and then you get a booster, and then you get a booster, just like every season. You have the choice to get a flu shot or not, and then the following season, you do the same thing. So I think we've learned a lot, and I think we will be prepared better if we ever find ourselves in this situation again.
All right, well, the Indiana General Assembly session is wrapping up. We were talking just before we went on that things could be wrapping up here in the next day or so. What are some of your thoughts? Yeah, what are some of your thoughts on this short session as it wraps up? I guess things perhaps you appreciate, maybe some things you don't appreciate about the session.
Well, the session, as president of the Senate, when the Senate is in session, I run the Senate.
Right.
And what I can share with you is that this has been one of the most collaborative, congenial sessions that I've been involved with. And legislators seem to be focused on doing what's right for Hoosiers and working together across the aisle. That is, to me, extremely important. Some of the issues that I believe really are important to Hoosiers that I'm proud of the General Assembly for taking on is the $1 billion error and FSSA's, actions as a result of that, them taking that issue on, because initially they were reluctant to do so, but they have taken it on with some amendments. I hope those stay in so that Hoosiers will be best served moving forward. The bill that allows for our children to be tested in the second grade to determine their proficiency in reading, so that by third grade, we can give them the remedial help, those that are struggling, so that they can pass iRead 3 is huge, absolutely huge in determining the success of our young people moving forward, because we know that you learn to read and then you read to learn. And if you can't read by the third grade, you're going to struggle through school and you're going to struggle through life. So that ability to now have a mechanism in place to identify those children that are struggling before the third grade, because what we don't want to do, John, we don't want to hold children back. We want them to be able to move forward in their education with their peers, but we also have to make sure that they can read and be successful.
Well, let's ask quickly, if we could, why did you throw your hat into the ring? Why do you want to be Indiana's next governor?
Well, John, I care deeply about Indiana and about Hoosiers. And I have the passion, the commitment, the courage, and the experience to deliver results for Hoosiers. I don't need on-the-job training. And we will start by focusing on 4 building blocks for the future. We're going to grow our economy, invest in education, strengthen our families and our communities, and then modernize state government. And I want to boldly lead Indiana into the future. It's why I have proposed that as governor, I will lead the fight to eliminate the state income tax. We even have a name for it. We're going to axe the tax. As I mentioned earlier, I've traveled the state, and Hoosiers are struggling with the high cost of living, inflation, and Bidenomics. We have an opportunity to put $2,000 back into the average Hoosier's pocket every year. Now, my opponents, no one else is suggesting that because they think government can spend money better than Hoosiers can.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Crouch, we are running out of time. We will have to leave it there, but we certainly appreciate you joining us and taking our questions today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John.